Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. I'm going to start today with the very simple questions that a lot of people have that I can maybe shed some light on, and then maybe get to talk a little bit about what the big picture is going on. So, first of all, the news is alive this afternoon with a New York Times story that brings more information about Maine Senate candidate Graham Platner to the table. And I'm not going to comment on primary. That primary in Maine has not happened yet. There are three people on the Democratic ballot. They are the current governor, Janet Mills, Graham Platner, and a man named David Costello, who has been in politics here for a long time. And there is a write-in candidate, Andrea LaFlame. So for those of you who think that this is a done deal, it's really not yet. And what people are asking, and what has shown up a lot in the questions, is why are people hitting on, doing a hit pieces on Graham Platner? And I want to be really clear, they're not. That the way our political system works is that you usually start at local or state level offices. And what that does is it gives people time to find out more about candidates. And a lot of people will drop by the wayside because they have something in their past that doesn't play well with voters, or that, they would rather not have be part of the public conversation. And that's sort of how the system works. And one of the dangers of jumping right into what was going to be the highest profile Senate race in the country is that Platner was never vetted. And what happens is, and again, normally what a candidate will say is they'll go through their life and really try and make a list of anything that could be used against them. And there were some concerns that Platner had not done that. And he has reassured people there wouldn't be more stuff coming out about him. And of course, now there is. But this is actually part of the way the system works. It's called opposition research, or OPPO. And it's just part of the system. You might have heard of the Steele dossier, which is something that came out about Donald Trump in 2016. That actually was begun not by Hillary Clinton, but by the team of one of his opponents on the Republican side. And that's not a bad thing, to have people vetting our candidates so we know what's behind them. We have had lately candidates who have had backstories that really were unsavory and made them really problematic candidates in office. And I'm thinking of somebody like George Santos in New York, for example. So whatever you think about anything that's happening here, um, uh, Graham Platner is not being singled out for abuse here. This is the way the system works. He did jump ahead into an extremely high profile race, and the opposition research is coming out now. And that's just what's going on. This is not that anybody is focusing explicitly on him. And again, you can see in races across the country, people are digging to see what they can use against their opponents. And then it goes to the voters, and the voters decide whether or not they can live with the sorts of things that they are hearing about the candidates. And this is one of the things, by the way, that really, really worries me and upsets me about the amount of money that is now in our political system. And that is that, especially on the radical right, there is so much money in the system that they essentially can flood the zone with either false information, or they can cover up true stories about Republican candidates. And you've seen a number of people in this last cycle who the voters ended up being really unhappy with the people that they had put in office because they thought they were something different than what they were getting. One of the reasons I'm a big fan of getting rid of Citizens United and retaking the country. I will talk more about that in a minute. But there are some very good questions that people asked around Platner, and and around the issues that he raises, and I will get to those. But let me get through these simpler things first. The second thing that I want to say that should have been first, and I apologize for that, is that I was incorrect last Tuesday when I said that there was going to be a major No Kings rally on June 14th, Donald Trump's birthday. There is not. What there is an attempt at both the New York City level and at local levels to have music events, which I think is totally cool. But go to the No King's website and you can learn more about that. I was mistaken and I apologize for that. Somebody called me out on that and I'm glad they did. Um, you asked as well about the fact that Trump has said that he is going to appoint Bill Pulte or William Pulte as the acting director of national intelligence and what's going on with that. And that's an extremely good question because Bill Pulte is a Trump loyalist. He comes from real estate and he now manages one of the agencies in the U.S. government that manages things like mortgages. But what really stands out about Pulte is that he is an attack dog for Trump. He has used the power that he has in the federal government to attack people that Trump sees as his political enemies, people like Lisa Cook, who's on the Federal Reserve Board, who said something negative about inflation, or like the former chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, or Jay Powell, who has steadfastly kept in front of him the needs of the American people rather than the needs of Donald Trump, and has refused to lower interest rates to pump more money into the economy and that would drive inflation even faster. And Trump, because of that, has wanted very much to get rid of Jay Powell. And Powell was just very recently stepped down from being the chair. His term was up. And traditionally, when somebody does that, although their term on the board continues, they retire, which is what he had planned to do. And he stayed on the board because he said somebody has got to be here to keep the ship steady, and that he did it at quite a bit of sacrifice to his own plans. So that's another person that Pulte went after, in that case, alleging that he had overspent on renovations for some of the Federal Reserve buildings that were being renovated. So Trump is putting this guy in a really crucial position. The director of national intelligence is the person who coordinates the intelligence from the 18 different intelligence agencies in the federal government and makes sure they talk to each other and assesses what they are saying. And it's really, again, the first thing that a government is supposed to do is keep people safe. And this is that key position in the United States. That's the person who is designed to see what's going on and keep us all safe. And Trump simply has thrown away that the importance of that role for us, and instead is using it for what some of the right-wing activists who support Trump have called going after domestic terrorists rather than than foreign terrorists. And what they mean by that is people who are not on Trump's team. And Pulte is expected to use the power of the federal government if he is in the position of DNI, Director of National Intelligence. And by the way, if you're watching what's happening in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, this is one of the agencies that kind of bothers me in terms of how we talk about it. And this is stupid. Maybe this is just because I do so much with words. It is literally called the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, not the Office of National Intelligence, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So this would be the head of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and he would be the Director of National Intelligence. But when you see the acronym, it's ODNI, and the director is the DNI, which is unlike, I believe, almost any other agency in the government. And it makes it hard to remember. And when you see ODNI, it looks a little like that dog in the Garfield comic strip who's Odie. That's what always makes me think of it. So if you get confused about that, that's what that acronym is. And it is different than the way they have made acronyms for other agencies. And that DNI was Tulsi Gabbard. She is stepping down at the end of June, and Trump is saying he's going to put this guy, Bill Pulte, in her place, and that he will then be able to use the power of the government to reinforce Trump's power. And Senator Ron Wyden, who is the Democratic senator from Oregon, who has been all over the degree to which the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, which is in before the Senate right now, even as we speak, where they're trying to reauthorize it, has been very concerned about the fact that there are not sufficient protections in, if you care, it's Section 702, but in that to make sure that the government can't use surveillance techniques against people in the United States. And Wyden is very clear about what that could look like under somebody like Pulte. They could blackmail people, including members of Congress. They could smear people, again, including members of Congress. They could go after nonprofits or political opponents or activists that are working against Trump by virtue of information that Pulte could get his hands on through things like FISA and then use against us. So that's what's going on with that. But there's something else there that matters a lot. And that's that when you see discussions of officers of the federal government, look for the word acting, because the Congress put into law that it is possible for a president to nominate somebody to be an acting officer. And that totally makes sense, right? If Congress or the Senate isn't in session and you have a vacancy and you need it to be filled, you can say, okay, I'm going to appoint Jane here as the acting DNI, for example, till Congress can come back, and then I'll make a nomination, and then we'll move forward in the normal scheme of things. But Trump in his first term ended up largely surrounded by acting officers. And here's the kicker to that. You can be an acting officer. It actually can get extended a number of times, but you can be an acting officer, for example, of DNI for 210 days before you have to, there has to be a real nomination in front of the Senate for that position. And Trump likes acting people around him because they're utterly dependent on him. Like if you look at Todd Blanche, for example, who is currently the acting attorney general, Blanche just rolled out this slush fund and immunity for Trump for any possible IRS violations for Trump, his oldest sons, and the Trump organization, because he would like actually to get that nomination. And so he's on super behavior, good Trump behavior, because he wants that nomination. Now, Trump has done that with Bill Pulte. And remember that under Tulsi Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard actually went with the FBI to gather up information from the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. I'm going to go with it. Might have been North Carolina. And Trump today said, well, Pulte might find something about the 2020 election. I mean, he's clearly still hammering on this. But look at the numbers here. I just told you could be the acting DNI for 210 days. The election is in 152 days. So what he is essentially doing is trying to stock that position with a loyalist who can use the intelligence systems in the United States in favor of Donald Trump before and immediately after the midterm elections. That's a super big deal. That is a super big deal. So that's what's going on with the DNI. And that is, there has been pushback about that. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But people, speaking of midterms, people asked if Trump will cancel the midterms. No. He is not going to cancel the midterms. There would just be such a hue and cry over that. He's not going to cancel the midterms. But, it's always a but. In American political history, there's always a but. But there are elections in authoritarian governments all the time. Russia has elections. North Korea has elections. The issue is not so much the elections as whether or not they will be free and fair. And that is very much on the table. That's something I'm going to encourage you to work toward going forward. So don't worry about there not being elections. Worry about the fact that they can be messed with in such a way that they are not free and fair. And by the way, that has been the case in the United States since the whole process of taking away people's right to vote really began in 1986. This is something we really must fix going forward. I probably won't have time to talk more about that going forward, but more short questions that you asked. Where does the money go When Trump makes cuts, when he does things like ripping out or attempting to rip out the 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 information systems that are along the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts to monitor both weather and climate change and the currents and so on. And by the way, the science of oceans and ocean currents is, first of all, totally cool. But second of all, and I should write about this, it's way more important than people who don't live on the coast understand. That is, so much of our just local climate along the coastlines is not controlled by, is contributed to by the currents that exist. And I actually now would love to do a deep dive on the Labrador Current and the Gulf Stream, which are really what determine the both the lobster industry and the fishing industry off the coast of New England, but also a lot of our weather, and how those things are dramatically changing because of climate change. But that's as much as I'm going to give you now, because I'm waiting for that day when I can do the rabbit hole thing. Anyway, it's really interesting, and if anybody wants to know more, I someday I would love to just start doing these short things. I actually know a lot about the Labrador Current and the cod fishing industry, which is way cool. I will stop. Anyway, where does the money go when we get a cut like that? And this is a really important question, because money is going to be an important question today. So if the administration does something like it is saying it's cutting the system to save money, and in the scheme of things, this is an incredibly inexpensive system. And it was supposed to last for 25 years. They want to rip it out after only 10. They're really getting rid of it, not to save money so much as to make sure we just don't monitor climate change and what's happening along the coastlines, and in the oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. But what happens to that money when they say we're going to be saving that money? Well, first of all, they're not supposed to be able to do that. If Congress has put together the money and has appropriated the money to do something like fund this system, the executive branch is not supposed to be able to do anything to change that. That is, if you look at the Constitution, you will see it is Congress that has the power to appropriate money. It is Congress that has the power to pass the laws to decide how that money is spent. This is 1,000% not negotiable. And this is in the Constitution. This is in the duties of Congress in the first section of the Constitution. It's called the first article of the Constitution, and it's also obvious from, if you think about our history and the fact that the people who put together the Constitution were, hyper aware of the fact that they wanted the elected representatives of the people to be the ones to determine how money would be spent. When Russell Vogt, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, see, it's not the DOMB, it's OMB. He's the director of the OMB. I'm sorry, that really bothers me, that ODNI. Anyway, when he says, well, we're just not going to spend money on that, that is unconstitutional, and it is also illegal under a law that was passed after Nixon tried the same thing, called the Impoundment Act. Impoundment is illegal. Now, the radical right that is now in control of the government insists that they want to challenge that, but that is how the law reads, and that is how the Constitution reads. So they're not supposed to be able to do that. But there is a philosophy behind what they are doing that says that they don't want the government, the federal government, to be in control of these big systems around the country. They want to get rid of the federal government and send the power back to the states and get rid of these big systems. And one of the things that they want to do is to get rid of regulations and get rid of the people who monitor those regulations, and to get rid of taxation. So one of the very few things that the Republicans have done since Donald Trump took office in 2025 is to pass that measure last July. It's a budget reconciliation measure. So remember, it did not need Democratic votes. It only had to have a simple majority in both the House and the Senate. And that budget reconciliation measure slashed the federal government, including cuts to Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that are not going to kick in full until after the midterm elections. That's really important to remember, because when those hits come, especially if the Democrats have taken back the House and the Senate, the Republicans are going to start screaming, the Democrats have done this to you, but they have not. That it's the Republicans did that to take effect later. And in that budget reconciliation measure that the Republicans call the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was dramatic cuts to the taxes of very wealthy Americans and of corporations. So when there are these cuts and the money goes back into, theoretically, the money goes back into the government, what it is theoretically designed to do is to make it possible to have these major tax cuts. That may or may not be where it goes. I'll talk more about that in a second, but let me get first to a lot of little, I should be clear. When I say little questions, I don't mean they're unimportant. I mean that I can answer them quickly and not sort of do one of those big sweeping things I do. And I'm sorry if I gave the impression that these were cosmically little questions. They're cosmically huge questions in them, but I can just kind of go through them quickly. All right. You asked about the clause in the section, not a clause, the section in the um, National Defense Authorization Act for 2027 that that brings together the U.S. military and the Israeli military. And I have not answered that for a while now, because as I said to people last night who asked about it, I don't know enough about it to know if this is different. Because sometimes you see stories and you think, oh my God, this is terrible. And then you actually dig and it's like, well, we always do this. I've dug into it today. And there's a very good, thorough piece, if you are interested in this, on military.com, which is the website where most of the military gets their news. It's a very reliable site, military.com. They have a good piece on it. There are a lot of good pieces on it. And what this section of the NDAA says, National Defense Authorization Act says, and by the way, you can find this yourself if you're interested. Just Google that you want the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, and for 2027, and then look for the word Israel. You can do Control F and do a search for it, and it'll pop you right to it. And or rather, you have to click it'll come up with the numbers. You got to click it again, but you can read this yourself, and you can read what it says yourself. It's short. The language is pretty clear. It's way down in the document, though. So if you're looking for just that, don't go line by line. But what this does is, in American history, we have supported Israel with funding essentially through the State Department, through that branch, that this is separate from what the U.S. does. But this section in the NDAA, changes that entire thing by bringing the U.S. military and the Israeli military together in terms of a lot of their cyber systems and so on. So the actual software and hardware would be much closer integrated, and what make it much harder to pull them apart again. And then there is something else in it that is important, and that is that one of the ways in which these systems would be integrated would be through contracting. And the idea that Israeli firms, for example, would be making American products and so forth. There would be a much more integrating of the actual contracting and payment for munitions and so on, which has the potential to create a system in which Congress people would not want to pull apart first of all, couldn't pull apart that system. But if they wanted to pull apart that system, they wouldn't want to, because those those people in the defense industry, those defense industries would be supporting their constituencies. And it's a marriage of these two systems that ties us very closely to Israel at a time when the popularity of Israel in the United States is plummeting and not looking as if it's going to get better in a hurry as Israel continues to take over Gaza, the West Bank, and now Lebanon and parts of Syria. So there is that, and there's something interesting associated with that. If you are watching, um, so one of the things that I do when I watch the news, and this is kind of what I'm trained to do. So this is not something you might not um, do yourselves, but I kind of know where the bent is of different voices in the news. And one of the things that you can watch, if you're interested in knowing what the White House is doing and what the White House wants you to think is happening, is to watch Axios. Axios, and especially journalist Barack Ravid, who has an inside scoop to what's happening in the White House. And to me, that's an incredibly valuable window. Like, a lot of people don't want to read people like that because they think that they're getting propaganda, and they are. But if you know it's propaganda, it can be kind of helpful because you know what message they're trying to push. And so one of the things that came out of Axios within the last few days was this story that got picked up everywhere, that Trump was screaming on the telephone about to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and saying, everybody hates you, you've hurt Israel, and so on. It got a lot of press. But what it also did is it suggested there was real distance between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in this moment, when they're also trying to get through this National Defense Authorization Act. And I would just urge you to take that story with a real grain of salt. It might be true, it might not be true, but it does give Trump plausible deniability at a time when members of his administration are trying to tie the U.S. very closely to the Israeli military. All right, so a couple more questions. You asked once again, is the slush fund really dead? And the answer to that is no. What was accomplished by the outrage that Americans expressed over that $1.776 billion slush fund in the deal between Trump and his own Department of Justice was that amount of money, that $1.776 billion, the funding for that did not go into the budget reconciliation measure that the Senate is currently debating. It doesn't kill it, which is why members, especially of the House of Representatives, have introduced legislation to say, ain't happening, back off. It just said it wasn't going to get funded in that particular way. And that might kill it, but it also might not. And if you remember, when Blanche was in front of Congress the other day, Acting Attorney General Blanche was in front of Congress, he refused to put in writing that was dead. He would not do so. And that, to me says, if something's really gone, I'm good about putting it in writing. Wouldn't you be? So I don't think that's over yet. Maybe it is, but that's not over yet. Nor, and he said this outright, the part of that deal that gave Trump and his sons and the Trump organization immunity from any crimes they might have committed as part of their taxes, right up until the moment that they signed that agreement or they inked that agreement, that's still very much in play, according to Blanche. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether or not that's legal, and certainly Democrats are pushing hard against it. But right now, that still exists, which is what you asked. Now, here's a question. I'm going to go back to where I was, and that's where I started. And that's, I started talking about Platner, and somebody asked another question saying, why are, and they said leftist populists. So maybe I should talk about that. Leftist populists getting promoted while people with actual experience are getting left behind. And I think that's a fabulous question because it illuminates where we are in American history in this moment. Everything is changing right now. And it's changing, I think, because Americans have finally woken up to the idea that the system that has been in place since 1981 serves a very small group of extremely wealthy people. And Republicans push that system, push that ideology. But the Democrats, for a number of reasons, largely because of where voters were and because of who was controlling the public rhetoric, went along. So you look at where we are right now, and there is enormous fury at all of the politicians in power, even the Democrats who really have been trying to protect Social Security and to roll back the excesses of the Republican Party and then the MAGA Party. One of the things that has frustrated me to no end is that the Biden administration came into office, said they were going to roll back the things that the Republicans had done since Reagan, and did. And they got absolutely no press for it, and or absolutely almost no press for it, and absolutely no credit for it. And now people are waking up and really looking at where the system is now that Trump is rolling back the changes that Biden made and saying, we hate this. We want to get rid of this. And that's health. I think that's a healthy thing, not an unhealthy thing, because it's a recognition that this system that has moved more than $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of us up to the top point, it's less than 0.1% of us. It's a healthy thing to recognize that. The and you're seeing it with people talking in populist ways. And the thing that I would say, and the reason I was taking issue with the word leftist there, the things that people like Platner are saying, or people like James Tallarico in Texas are saying, would literally make them Eisenhower Republicans in the 1950s. This is not some, let's take over control of the means of production, which is the definition of somebody who's trying to create a different kind of leftist political system. This is literally, let's put up some fences around American capitalism so that the rich people don't take everything. And that is part of the liberal consensus that Republicans and Democrats both shared until the 1980s. So I'm going to take issue with that word leftist and go with the word populist and say this is incredibly healthy to do that, I think. Just that idea that we actually do, as individuals and as the American people, have the right and the ability to say, listen, we kind of like the idea of a trading economy. I have issues with the concept of, not the concept, the use of the word capitalism in the United States. We like profits. We like a trading economy. There are many ways to look at that and say that's a really good thing. That creates innovation and it creates economic growth. And that economic growth, while it can be extremely unhealthy, it can also do things like raise more than 1 billion people out of poverty, as it did after World War II. And it can do things like create the Green Revolution that stopped people from starving. And it can help people have healthy systems, or have health around the world, and get rid of things like screwworm. I'm going to come back to that, I suspect. That we like those things, but every system needs to have referees, and the federal government needs to be the referee for that. And if we are now finally getting young, exciting, or old for that matter, politicians, and we have some of those too as well who are saying that, that's all to the good, to my mind. And the thing that we say here is, when these people who don't have experience, we actually have a lot of people with experience who are saying that as well. The way this generally is supposed to work is you get new voices, but they learn how to do it, how to move and by to do it, I mean to move the lever so you actually get things passed. Often people who are the most vocal about sort of the issues I care about don't actually get anything passed because they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to do the wheeling and dealing and the negotiating and so on. And if you have ever been in the position of observing good negotiators, I have twice in my life, both of them were educators. It's like watching an artist, and believe me, I don't have that skill set, and not a lot of people do, but you can learn it. And that's usually how a political system works. You get the new people in, the new ideas, and they learn from older people how to put those things in place. And if you want an example of that, I would say you have to look no further than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who both speaks very clearly about what the government should do is very good about selling those ideas and also has worked very closely with older politicians to see where the levers of power are. And when I talk about the levers of power, I mean many things, but if you think about someplace like Delaney Hall in New Jersey, where there's a hunger strike because of both the conditions and the fact that the people inside Delaney Hall have been cut off from the legal system, you know, there are many people protesting at Delaney Hall, and we need those voices a lot. But one of the most profound and dangerous attacks on Delaney Hall has actually come from the city of Newark, which says, you're not letting our health inspectors in. By law, you have to let our health inspectors in, so we're going to shut you down. Now, I don't know about you, I wouldn't have thought of that. Um, and that's what I mean by the levers of power, whether or not that's going to work, being able to say, okay, we can't go head on. How can we get around it? And if you think, as I say, about somebody like Al Capone, the federal government did not get Al Capone for the big bad stuff he did. They got him on tax evasion. And again, looking back at the fact that Trump has now made it look as if he can get away with all the tax evading he might have done, there's an echo behind that. And similarly, I was just thinking about it today. Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, also ended up pleading guilty to tax evasion, even though he had done all sorts of corrupt stuff. That's what they finally got him on. So it's not that I think that people who understand politics are ignoring the ones who know how to do stuff. Often people who haven't been paying very close attention to politics are thrilled, so thrilled finally to be hearing somebody say what needs to be said, as many people are right now. And they tend to overlook that other piece about how you need to know where the levers are. And what I would say about that is we actually need both of those groups. We need the people who articulate the real anger among those people who recognize that our system is not working for them. We also need those people who know how to change the system. And if you can find somebody who can do both, make that person president. That's, you think about in our history, the people who really know how to get that stuff done. And LBJ is a great example of that. Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1960s, that's how we got the Great Society. He not only knew how to say it, he knew how to make it happen. And so that, I think, is a really important question about why are you seeing the Tallaricos and the Platners and all these new voices, Rob Sands in Iowa, and I'm drawing a blank. Why are we seeing those new voices? Because they are articulating this moment in American history and the frustration of so many of us who have watched our system fall apart over the last 40 years, and they're offering to fix it. And it's up to you to decide who you think actually can fix it and how to put those people in power. But having them articulate that is part of a larger move toward being able to articulate a new vision for American democracy for the 21st century. And again, some of those people are going to fall by the wayside. That's not a bad thing. They may decide that they don't want to be in politics or whatever. Here we go. I'm going to give you some more names. Maxwell Frost out of Florida. He's terrific. He is like terrific. And he's not only good at the talking, he's good at the doing. Justin Jones, from Tennessee. I mean, there are a lot of those people out there doing really re-articulating what American democracy can be. And I find it really exciting. And one of the things that people complain about is that they feel like people aren't coalescing fast enough around one person. And I really disagree with that. It would be lovely to think that, we can just grab hold of our great leader and we'll just cruise to victory for eternity. But that's not the way this era is going to go. Like any era when we really have to rethink democracy, and I'm thinking the 1850s and the 1860s and the 1890s and the 1930s, we need to, and then I'll even give you the 1950s if you want it. 1970. You can have the 50s, you can have the 60s and the 70s. In any of those times, what we had to have was a lot of different voices and a lot of new ideas. And you have to see them coming together. And if you've been watching my American Conversations, I've been talking to people like Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois and Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts to see how they, as quite experienced politicians, are translating this real focus on using the government for the good of Americans into actual policies. And it's been really interesting because both of them, and I think especially Healy, talked about how getting something like cheaper housing is not really a question of sort of waving your flag and saying, we're going to make cheaper housing. It's about pushing a bunch of little pieces around so all of a sudden they all drop into place, kind of like Tetris. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at things. So I don't think it's that you should think, oh, we got all these new voices and they're all idiots and we want the old tried and true people. Tried and true people are great, and we need a lot of them. But I think it's a better way to look at this to say we're in a period of extraordinary transition. And we need all these voices and these abilities to move us into the 21st century. And that's actually where I'm going to leave this today. That we're in it now. We're in the craziness, and we're in the well, let me put it this way, and this is probably what I'll write about tonight. If you read me, you know that I didn't post until almost 4 o'clock this morning. And that's not, believe me, because I was somewhere eating bonbons. It's because those days when there are like 15 important stories all over the map are the hardest things in the world for me to write, because trying to find a common thread is just about impossible. So I was thinking about it, and I realized that one of the problems that I'm having writing history or modern, present day stuff in this moment is that there isn't, normally when you look at an era, there's kind of a thread through it. There's things will be pushing in a certain direction, and there'll be certainly people who disagree and they're backsliding or whatever. But generally, certainly if you're looking at politics, you can say, well, this is what the people in power believe. And this is how they're moving the ball forward today. And this is where it went wrong. And here's how they're moving it forward today. And here are the people who are mad. I mean, it kind of goes along a line. This administration is all over the map. So Trump is falling apart. He fell asleep in a meeting today. He looks like hell. He's mentally all over I mean, things are not good there. But even within the Republican Party, even within the White House, there's like 4 different ideologies. You got the tech bros who want to have a small government in terms of taxes and regulation, but want to get all the contracts so they can afford to do whatever their pet project is. You've got the white nationalists like Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who wants a strong government so he can get rid of, now Greg Bovino, the former chief of Border Patrol, says he's going to get rid of 100 million, what he insists are undocumented immigrants. Experts say there are between 11 and 14 million undocumented immigrants in the country. He is literally saying that 1 out of every 3 Americans is an undocumented immigrant, which is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Anyway, so he wants to be a white nationalist. Then you got Russell Vought over at Office of Management and Budget, who is a Christian nationalist who wants a strong government so he can impose Christianity on everybody else. And then you've got the Trump people who are in there just slashing and grabbing everything that they can get. They just want money in their pockets. And then you have a lot of you have also all of those factions in Congress, but then you also have a lot of congressional senators who simply want to go back to where they were in 2015, where they can use the federal government to slash taxes and regulation, and they're cutting services to the American people. And so those are not the same story. Sometimes they're working together, sometimes they're working apart, and they're working against each other. It's a mess. And then in the midst of all that, what they are doing to the American people and to the US government is its own story. So I said I might talk again about screwworms. Screwworms are this really, really horrible worm that infects livestock, although it can affect other animals as well. They burrow into wounds for the most part, and they're extremely painful, and they cause huge problems for the animals. They burrow into them and they cause these gaping holes and so on. And that had been eradicated in the United States more than 60 years ago. And in part because we have gotten rid of our monitoring systems and so on, it's back. So are measles. So are milk-borne diseases. There's been a big outbreak recently. I think it was in Nebraska because people are drinking raw milk. Literally, we got rid of that with pasteurization a century ago. And now we're going backward. Now we got the rise of Ebola in Africa, in part because we took out so much US money that would identify when Ebola was spreading again. So we also have these stories of the destruction of the world as we knew it. And putting all this stuff together in a story is not easy. And then on top of all that, you got the story of the Democrats who are finding their voices and fighting all these things, but also starting to articulate this idea that the government should be used for the American people. And what they are really settling on is that $1.776 billion slush fund is a symbol of just how fully the Trump administration and the Trump family has been taking our money. And that is increasingly showing up in the news, even with things like today, a story from the Washington Post that says that the people who have donated to Trump's ballroom have, for the most part, been kept secret. But that I believe it's 27 of them, 27 known corporate donors to that project, that $400 million project, have received more than $50 billion of federal contracts. That's our money. It's our money going to people who are giving Trump favors. And that idea that we are coalescing around the objection to the use of our money and our government to enrich a very small cabal of people is fascinating to me. And it also explains why I have not been in any great rush to find our great hero who's going to lead us into battle, not literally, mythologically. And that's because in all of the great moments in our history when we have taken back our government and built a better one, we have always coalesced around the idea that a small cabal is, I'm sorry, that's the wrong word to use. A small group of people is using our tax money and our government to enrich themselves. That was the elite slave owners in the 1850s, the robber barons in the 1890s, and businessmen in the 1920s. That's when we managed to remake our society again. So the fact that we're coming around together around that, big speech by Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff on that on May 31st. The fact that we're doing this, the other person talking about it a lot is Sherrod Brown in Ohio, running for Senate, their former senator running for Senate, says to me that we are on this track again. Now, finally, somebody said to me, and I think probably in some frustration, because I always sound like Pollyanna, right? What would have to happen for me to concede that the United States is beyond hope? And the answer to that is that we would have to meet the end of the world. And the reason I say that is because I don't know about you, but I got to get up again tomorrow morning and I got to put one foot in front of the other. And I don't know what's going to happen. But I do know that I either have the ability to try and make the world a better place or to give up on it. And I will never give up on it. So when I think about our future and what we can do with our future, what I see is a country that has always been deeply flawed. That's what democracy is. It reflects the human beings who run it. And we are all profoundly flawed, all of us. I see that as an expression of the human will for self-determination. And I believe in that human will to have the control of our destiny, of who we become, and the real drive to create a government that enables all of us to have that human right. That's what's set out in the Declaration of Independence, and that's what people have fought for throughout our almost 250-year history. So when you ask, when am I really going to give up and say we're done? Not in my lifetime. because I know as a historian, we have done it in the past. And what has made the difference between doing it and not doing it is having people like me and like probably all of you committed to getting up the next day and doing the next right thing. So you're not going to hear that from me that we're done. And any time that you see me still in there pitching like I am, I still believe in the cause of American democracy, but also of human self determination. One final note on that, again, keep speaking up, local level, really important, state level, national level. And one final note from me, I hope you are watching and seeing our 250 to 250 videos, the 1 minute videos that our team and now people all across the country have been participating in to celebrate the 250th and the agency and power of everyday Americans to change the future, because that's what I really want people to think about going into this 250th. And when you do a project, you're never sure how it's going to turn out. I'm really proud of how these turned out. So you should take a look at them if you can. They're everywhere. And it's 250 to 250. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.